Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to our continued coverage of World Cup 2021 and our continued coverage of Levy adds furniture to his room every single video. In today's episode, I tried to assemble my standing desk. I also got my lamp out. And my camera, the final component of it will be shipped very soon, and I will fix that and I will have the camera back up and running. Standing desk doesn't work, so I've contacted the company, which I will not name, to save them any bad publicity, and hopefully we can figure everything out. It just doesn't work. It's a standing desk that goes up and down, but it doesn't go up and down, which therefore makes it just a regular desk. Anyway, thank you for dealing with my rant. Now, folks, we got a lot of awesome chess to cover. Here's a spoiler. The two games in the women's side, both draws, relatively peaceful. All four games in the men's side, decisive. Every one of these games had a winner, which means every one of these games had a loser, which means that all of the spectators are winners. You're a winner because we get to see awesome chess. All right, here we go. Magnus Carlsen now has the white pieces versus Etienne Bacro. Bacro needs to win with black. So, of course, you play the Sicilian. Knight f3, d6. Now, he is looking for a Najdorf. He is looking for a classical Sicilian. Magnus Carlsen plays bishop to b5 check. Now, bishop b5 check has a reputation of just killing off the opponent's fun. And this was really interesting. That Bacro chose a variation where the center is very locked. Like, if you need to win the game, you cannot lock the position, which is why a few moves later, he played the move f5, which, from a positional standpoint, is not the best, because after takes, you are left with really, really, really weak light squares. You don't have a light squared bishop, and you've put all your pawns on dark squares, and you have a dark squared bishop. Something doesn't fully add up there, you understand? But here's the thing, he needs to create something, and sometimes to create something, you need to take risk. And you'll notice that Magnus doesn't castle. Magnus plays knight g5, knight e4, because he wants to create a light squared bind with his horses. Okay, now both players castle, and now Magnus plays this move f4, which is one of the reasons he also back here moved his knight to g5. Now Magnus could have also played knight d5, looking to sneak in knight c7, and Bacro's a pretty strong player, so there's a pretty good chance he would have seen that coming. But the way Magnus played this, he routed his knight to e4, he castled, and he played this move f4, which makes a lot of sense because the queen is there, the rook is going to open up toward the queen. We got pawn takes, bishop takes, a trade, and queen g6. You'll notice that Magnus goes for this structure. He has an isolated pawn on e4, it has no neighbors, but it's supported. d6 is always under pressure, and basically these two weaknesses offset each other. If they are traded, if black wins this pawn and white wins this pawn, the board is completely symmetrical. Literally, down to exact placement of pawns. And when a guy needs to not lose, total symmetry is probably the best way to go, especially when you play white, because you go first to break the symmetry, right? So, knight d5, bishop g5, and a few moves later, there was a trade of rooks. Now here, I mean, it's just zeros. Rook e8 is like a move here, for example, which is what Bacro played to attack the pawn on e4. Magnus defends it. Very difficult to see how on earth you're going to try to create play here. So black plays h5. I mean, again, you want to play h5. I mean, you want to do something in a position, play h5. Now, Magnus should not play h4. It's a completely fine move, but it gives black way too much control of certain squares. Magnus instead plays the baby version of h4, which is, of course, h3. Etienne Bacro plays king h7 because he's like, dude, I don't know what to do. All my pieces stand great. Like, this knight is outstanding. Both knights mirror each other on outposts. This bishop powerful. Queen and rook coordinating to hit this. Maybe my king needs to go somehow and, like, have a conversation with this king. And, you know, after a little bit more shuffling, rerouting his knight back to the center, white just has an impenetrable position. Or is the word impregnable? I don't know. I became a chess streamer because I wasn't very good with my words. So, look, we have a threatening of a repetition of moves. Of course, in any game, Bacro just goes knight c6. In any like game where it's not a must win, you just repeat moves. But he chooses not to repeat moves, and a few moves later, when again, like literally, if you look at Magnus's last 10 moves, he's just moving back and forth because he did what he had to do. He froze the position. Rook takes e4 gets played. This move looks like it's a loss of a pawn if white takes and then queen e4. Black is just a pawn up. Black is probably gonna pressure white for a long time. Yes, you can win this, but your king's a bit exposed. Of course, computer's still saying 0, 0, 0, but it should shut up. Instead of that, there's this nice move, knight e7, and this is a big problem for black because your queen is under attack, and this is called X-ray defense. I defend my knight through your piece. So black plays rook takes e7. Now, back row could have just played this move, and after takes, and of course there is bishop d6 here, but even something like queen f7, threatening mate, threatening this pawn, there would have been a big trade like this, and yeah. It's just a draw, probably. Actually, if anybody's playing this for advantage, it's white, because knight c8 is on the way. Instead of that, back row sacrifices his rook, and as you might imagine, Magnus still needs to be a little bit careful, because Etienne does have a very nice knight, he does have a very nice bishop, he does have a very nice queen, but Magnus just doesn't let him get any breathing room, brings the king to defend the queen, and in this position, back row resigned, because frankly, anywhere he moves the queen, queen e4, oh, that's illegal, but queen e4 is coming. For example, the move queen d2 runs into check, which ultimately will probably run into a checkmate in the future if you go back, and king to h6 runs into this, and the very simple queen trade. That is the easiest way to win a game of chess like this. Rook versus knight, take some pawns, and Magnus Carlsen beats Etienne back row 2-0. And Magnus is now 8 out of 10 in classical. In the long games, he has 6 wins and 4 draws. 8 out of 10, not 2 losses. He has 6 wins and 4 draws. He's melting people. I mean, what can you say? Okay, next game I'm going to show you, Vladimir Fedoseev versus Amin Tabatabai. Yesterday they had a draw that they paused a little early for my liking. Like around move 30, it was just about to heat up. Now today, of course, we get the Catalan, which is a mainstay at this level. Fedoseev has been a killer. Fedoseev has been as high as 27-30, 27-40 in his career. His rating for this tournament is 26.96, but he's still gaining tons of points. He actually went down to like 26.70. He's had a roller coaster of the past few years, but he's unbelievably strong. It's interesting to see how he just destroys everybody in a field like this. Now, can Tabatabai stop him with the black pieces? Castles, knight c6. This is the way black justifies doubling up on the c-file. You play knight c6, you pressure white center. But white is always happy here. And the only critical approach to this position is d takes c5. You actually have to enter this queenless middle game after queen d1, rook d1, bishop c5. Yeah, this is the only way white can ever hope to prove any semblance of an advantage here, because this bishop is better than this bishop. That's basically it. Black is a little bit more passive. And what black does here, rather than allow knight c4, is play this move c3. And you let white take your pawn back, but you split the pawns. Now, ultimately, that doesn't really do too much, because white still gets to play knight b3. You now have to move your bishop, and then white uses the c pawn against you by playing c4, maybe c5, also taking away the d5 square. And just, you know, the game is usually played with rook b1, knight d4, bishop e3, bishop f4, and you just pressure like this area, you know, because you have the Catalan bishop. Okay, bishop d7, bishop b2. Okay, he chooses not to go to f4. He threatens bishop f6 and rook takes d7. That's pretty bad. So rook's... Wait, I'm sorry? Isn't there bishop takes f6? Bishop f6, rook d7, bishop a1, here, rook d8. I don't know, maybe this is some sort of theory. Yeah, but this wasn't played. After rook c8, he did not take on f6, instead opting to play the move knight back to e1. I don't know the theoretical status of this position, but I'm kind of surprised he didn't take on f6. Okay, well, maybe I don't know my theory. Bishop back to e8. Okay, well, now that's out of the window. I mean, I'm really surprised he did... Whatever. These guys know more about chess than me, but I'm still confused. But you see everything that white is doing in terms of rerouting the knight back and advancing this isolated pawn and defending it. Like, look at that. The pawn is being escorted by the horses, right? If black ever plays b6, this move really destabilizes this diagonal. You got to be damn sure that you are not going to get smashed there. And here, Fedoseev plays an interesting move. He takes. He gets rid of the Catalan bishop to create a weakness on d5. And it is very much a weakness, but you do invest your most powerful possession into this. And, you know, the knight transfers and ends up taking for the bishop. And then we have king f1. King f1 defends the pawn on e2. Not a very complicated decision. And the bishop is looking to go to d6, right? That is really the purpose here. And there you go. But now b6. A long time ago, I said this is bad because you destabilize the diagonal. But you don't have a destabilizing piece anymore. So b6 is completely fine. Rook c1 f6. And a few moves later, we had a big trade. Knight takes d4. Now we have a trade. Bishop a2. It's 2 rooks and 2 rooks with opposite colored bishop and 5 pawns each. It is an absolutely harmless game. But I did say that today, there was 4 decisive games. So you guys know that this game was not a draw. Okay, let's see what happens. Black plays rook e8. White advances with the king. Black advances with the h pawn, h5, h4. Now we have a, now you know what's up. Bishop back to f4. This is what is known as a practical endgame. Books are not written about positions like this. Now, you can sprinkle in endgame concepts into this position. For example, the opposite color bishops benefit the attacking player, the player who's trying to create an initiative. Also, the pawn structure, right? These two pawns might be more delicate than this one. White always has ideas like to play c6, for example, which is why here you take, because if you don't take, you need to at least create this threat, then you need to take. Like, just to show you, you cannot allow this pawn to sit on c7. It's just, you just can't do it. That will kill your position. So what black does is take on c5, and now rook b7. Now, what does black have here? One major weakness, a potential weakness on h5. What does white have? No obvious weaknesses. I mean, rook b2 will get the e-pawn, but you just won't let that happen. You'll play rook back to a3, and if rook b2 gets played, you will put something on e3. You will either trade rooks or bring the bishop back. And also, there is strategy as to whether or not you should trade the rooks. Do you trade both rooks? If both rooks get traded here, it's just a draw. You cannot win an opposite colored bishop endgame with 4 pawns each. It's just unwinnable unless you're, a guess the elo submitter. King h7, and basically what Fedoseev just did the rest of the game is you'll notice that, Tabatabai is not doing a whole lot. He's kind of doing what Magnus did last game, right? Okay, nothing has happened, literally, the last 7-8 moves. Okay, there we go, e4, bishop d4. One pair of rooks has been traded. Now, here's the problem. If you go bishop d4, what do you take on a7 with? The bishop. You do not take with the rook. You need to keep one pair of rooks on the board to maintain any winning chances. And bishop c4 was played because a6 is the idea, so black will save the pawn. Okay, rook c5, e5. Interesting. If you take this pawn, rook e5, rook to g5, pressuring this, and this is very bad for black. So he goes bishop d7, but still, Fedoseev has made a little progress because he's now pulled the pawns completely apart. Excuse me. I was so excited that I burped. Rook d8, rook c6, bishop d4, a6. Black has no weaknesses. This is a completely equal position, gentlemen. Please. Let's call this a day. Okay, tickle, nothing going. All right, let me bring the king. And again, moves like f5 check look good, but you break your control of the dark squares, and the king just advances. You don't want to allow this free advancement. Or king f4. It just there's no need to allow this, right? So king f7, rook a8, rook a7. Nothing's happening. I promise you. White has activated his king, but now he has to come right back. Okay, rook c6. Okay, great. Bishop f5. Yep. Not. Are you bored yet? Because I'm a little bit bored. Okay. I feel like I've seen this position before, gentlemen. Can we please just... Okay, rook c4, rook d6. Okay. You'll notice that Amin allowed the rook to go to d6. That is how the position has changed a little bit. But it's still equal. And now he can push his a-pawn. But Fedoseev is trying to crawl a little bit forward here, right? Okay. a4, the pawn's gone up 2 squares. But white's rook is very powerful. It's on the optimal square. In all these endgames, you need to find the spot for the optimal square for your piece. And it exerts the most amount of pressure there. It can always sneak around this way. It pressures the bishop, the pawn, this pawn, everything. Okay, rook a7 check, king back to e3. Rook b4, trying to maybe sneak in over to b3, push this pawn. Bishop takes f6. Now, rook b3, rook takes does very much look appealing here after bishop takes f6. Looks like you can give this check and take because you have lost the pawn. So you want to win the pawn back. That's exactly what happened. Play takes. Now here there's a kind of an interesting trick. If white plays the move f5, which attacks the bishop, if you take, I have bishop to e5 check and I win the rook. That's a very nice trick. The problem is danger levels. Black can go check first and then win back the pawn. And I'm sure that's what Tabatabai saw when he played rook takes g3. The problem is I can change my move order. Bishop e5 check. And it's not f5, because then check again. It's this. Now you need to go back and guard your bishop. And after king d7, I can check you and I can take, or I can just take. And now if king e6, f5 is check. That is the difference. And the worst part about this is that after takes, pawn and bishop, especially a flank pawn, A or H, can be a draw. but only if the corner is not the right square as the bishop. And in this case, it is. And the way white would win this is by going all the way back, and when the king comes to chase, you go win this pawn. King e2, you bring the bishop around, doesn't matter where, back to d8, and that is how you win this endgame, folks. You win the a-pawn, you go back, you use Zugzwang technique to win the h-pawn, and then you promote. If it was a light-squared bishop, it would be a draw. But Tabatabai blunders on the 70th move of defending this pretty tricky endgame. What made this so tricky was the split nature of the position. See, white's structure is super compact. It's all right there. But because the white rook can zoom around and hit everybody at the same time, it's very difficult to defend an endgame when the bishops are on opposite colors, because you can't defend against the bishop. And that is how Fedoseev knocked out Tabatabai by, I mean, the closest of margins. And now he's up like 25 points. Yeah, I mean, Fedoseev is just crushing in this event. Unbelievable stuff. And Tabatabai, really unfortunate ending. But if we go to the last round, he was on the verge of elimination. It just shows you how brutal the World Cup is. He was very distraught. Now, third game of the day I'd like to show you. Young Krzysztof Duda versus Vidit Gujarati from India. And this one was unbelievably complicated. So it was a Roux Lopez and castles b5. Now, of course, main line is bishop to e7, but b5, bishop c5, Arkhangelsk variation. We've seen a4 get played here, but really the whole point of this line is that black walks into c3, d4. For example, a4, c3, d4, and plays like bishop b6. And there's many, many lines where this bishop gets booted around, like a5. And you cannot take. You cannot take because after rook a5, bishop takes a5, you're actually in serious trouble here. For example, take here, here, and look at how powerful this horse is. It threatens this, and it threatens this. It's threatening to fork 4 pieces. So that would be very bad. That wouldn't work. So bishop back to a7, and this position has been reached like 20-something times. Basically, black is trying to line up an attack on white's center once everything opens up. White plays bishop to e3 and offers black the pawn on e4. It's completely free, except once you take it, absolutely mind-boggling complications begin. We have d5, attacking the knight. Black takes, white takes. So white is now threatening 2 bishops. Black takes on f2 with the knight, threatening the queen. Now, white does not go rook f2. White plays queen e2, hitting 3 pieces now. Black takes with double check. White plays king h1. Black goes back, white takes, and now black takes, and white takes on f2. White could also take on b7, but that would allow this bishop to escape, and that would apparently be wrong. It's apparently better to take on f2, bishop c6, and now, folks, do you see what's lining up over there? Knight takes e5. If you take, it's mate. That is not how the game ended. But if you take, it's mate. So now Vidit plays bishop takes g2 check. I'm going to lose my bishop anyway. I might as well get a pawn for it. What? You can take it with both pieces. You take it with neither of them. Yes, that's actually the right move, because the knight still can't get taken. You see, if you take like this, there's no mate anymore. So check. I get all my counterplay. And if king g2, there's again check. I'm going to check you. But by playing king g1, I force you to make a decision to guard your king. You cannot use any checks. So you play queen f6, and now I play takes on f7. We trade, rook f8, takes. Okay, it's move 25. Black has a rook and 6 pawns. All the pieces are gone. White has a knight and 3. And a rook, yes. And by the way, these 2 pieces haven't even moved. Move 25, they haven't even moved. You just gave away everybody. You're like, oh, damn, I still got those 2 pieces? Oh, damn, okay. Come on, you know? So how do you play a position like this? It's very tricky. The trickiest thing about this position is the fact that you need to look around and go, where are the weaknesses? Well, this is terrible for black. If this pawn was back more, this knight could never get to b4 or c5. Not right now, but I'm just saying in the future. If this pawn is lost, the game is over. Like, the pawn promotes. There's no... So black has to constantly worry about that. So as the game progresses, of course, both players bring their rook to the center. It's the eternal question, who wants a rook trade? Who wants a rook trade? Like, for example, king f2. Like, for example, like rook f3. Can black go here? Can black go here and trade rooks? Does black want a rook trade? Or can this knight get to b4 and win this pawn? I don't know. Computer thinks that it's fine, but it's also on a low depth. I don't know. It might need some time to analyze. Clearly, this is not a trade of rooks, by the way, because knight f3. It's not clear what they want. Now, of course, Duda's just playing moves. Computer hated h5 for some reason. It thought that this was an overcommitment. And the computer, I mean, of course, it doesn't fully understand the position, but the eternal search for coordination of these three pieces is the question. Like, where does the knight belong? Does it belong on f4 to now pressure those two pawns that Vidit kind of weakened? Right, the king is going back to g8, g2. What is Duda trying to accomplish in this position? Okay, there we go. Now we're going to b4. Okay, and Vidit just doesn't care. He's just going for the queen. If you take here, rook a2, every pawn gets lost. Like, you lose g5 with check, and you lose b5. You're going to lose the game. Guaranteed. So you can't do that. But Duda plays this move. And then takes. And Vidit tries to create counterplay with b4. Takes. Can we double check? Knight takes b4. I think Vidit may have missed this move. Because after cb4, a6, bc3, a7, c2, a8 queen, rook b1, they both make queens. But the problem is, it's white's move. You see, in positions where both of you queen, sometimes you go, oh, I don't like that because they get a queen too. Yeah, but it's your move. And there's a problem here. The problem is that this king has no escape. Let me just give you a very small example. Let's say the position was this. But like, let's say one of these pawns was, I'm just transforming the position. Like, let's say there was a pawn on h4 or a pawn on g4. Let's say this. There may be positions this king can run out and hide or use the pawns as a shield. Computer doesn't seem to think anyway. It thinks that you can always prevent the king from escaping. But the slightest change in a position sometimes will allow the king to shield itself. But ideally, the king shields itself with the best pieces. Turns out that the king cannot just zigzag in the pawns here. I'm just trying to make a small point. Turns out I was wrong. That's okay, we're gonna keep on rolling. But the point that I'm trying to make is, don't just stop like, oh, we both get queens. No. It turns out that because the king has to now run across the board, that is going to be the demise. And it has to step in front. Rook c7 check. And after king b4, this endgame is still very difficult to win. Rook and pawn versus queen is very tough to win, because the pawn and the rook can create a fortress. So instead of that, we have queen b7 check, king a5, and it's just mate. It's just mate in a couple moves. There's ladder mate coming. I saw people somewhere here were critical that Vidit allowed that. Like, they were saying he should have continued, he shouldn't have resigned. There was some crazy debate. The game is over, folks. Not to mention the tremendous amount of disappointment that you feel when, you know, when something like this were to happen. And it's very unfortunate because Vidit is by far a fan favorite. But yeah, Duda has been unbelievable in this event. So very disappointing for the supporters of Vidit from India and all over the world. I feel your pain. Vidit has been eliminated and Duda moves on to play against Magnus Carlsen in the semifinal. And that takes me to my final game of the day, which actually I am currently designing a thumbnail for. So the thumbnail that is currently being designed in the middle of this game will be for this game. Now, here's the situation. Karyakin's got to win. I'm typing to the thumbnail guy. So, e4. What do you play with the black pieces when you need to not lose a game of chess? The French. Okay. The French. d3, d5. Karyakin doesn't choose to play the mainline French with classical or Tarrasch or exchange or advance. No, he plays d3. This is something known as the King's Indian attack. And Shanklin plays a very early a5, a4. But generally what the King's Indian attack looks like is castles, bishop g2, c5, castles, knight c6. And white plays e5, like this, lodging up the center, and then goes h4, h5, knight f1, knight h2, knight u. Basically, white tries to attack over here, and black tries to attack on the queen side, which is exactly how the King's Indian defense works, but in reverse. It's a bloodbath, and, you know, Shankland expedites this, but what's funny is that by the time we reach this position, this has been played like hundreds of times, because the position became the same thing. Like sometimes black plays b4 here, sometimes black plays queen b6, b4, bishop b7. Shankland plays bishop b7, stops h6. This is very important. You play h6 because if you play b4, h6 is very strong. This is known to be extremely good for white. You would say, well, so what? Just g6. I mean, I don't understand. Like, I know you don't understand. Knight 1, h2. And then a combination of a few things, but knight g4, some knight g5 ideas, and very slowly you will creep up and you will just maul the opponent. It's not good to allow the pawn on h6, as we've seen in Alpha Zero games. And, you know, basically Karyakin ends up going with the g-pawn. Now, the computer hates this position for white. It's always like minus 0.7, minus 1. It says the same thing in the King's Indian when the colors are flipped. But this practically is very dangerous because white is loading up everybody to go over there. Everybody's going over there, right? So can Shankland call the bluff here? Queen d8 back, knight h2. And knight h2 is a very interesting move because after rook a6, which rook a6 is a fascinating move, there's positions where you can cut across. This pawn kind of moves, the knight moves, and you cut across. But you can also, you know, use the rook as an attacking mechanism. But rook a6, multi-pronged move. A lot of different ideas behind this one. King h1, slowly building up rook g1. Here the computer wants you to play rook ca8, which just doesn't make any damn sense to me. I think it's b4 is the point, and then you want to play a3. All of black's counterplay relies on the a pawn, but we have b4 and knight f8. You know the saying, knight f8, never mate. I think that's the saying. The problem is that black is not soft on the h7 square. Black is soft on g7. That is black's softest square. And everything that Karyakin is doing to slowly prepare g5 looks like it's going to land and it's going to be painful. But first he takes on b4, and he does this. This is interesting. He locks the center permanently. See, if we go back a couple of moves, black had opportunities to close the center and open his own bishop, something along those lines. But by doing this, you make this move look a little dumb because now the rook is never going to activate because the e-pawn will never move. And you kind of slow down black's counterplay. And also bishop f1. Now that move looks dumb for a few reasons. You're like, oh, got you. Now that rook is going to have to move, and my rook will open up once I move my bishop. Now here, after d4 by white, a3 is still the critical move. And basically it's like, look, either this will work at some point or it won't. If white were to play b3, like, haha, I froze everything. Black always has knight h7, and you see it's just an eternal struggle for the g5 advance. And this forever will be a benefit for black. So if all the pieces get traded, black wins just by virtue of the endgame because those pawns are so strong. White is trying to prevent black from getting anything, but Shankland plays knight a5, looking for knight c4, but Karyakin just moves. So now he's landed the g5 move, and takes, bishop takes, and I guess what Sam thought is that he's not going to go a3, he's going to go b3. b3 is his idea. For example, c takes b3, there's all these lines where the queen gets hit, so that doesn't make any sense. But here, Karyakin can also get out of there. He chooses to take on e7, which opens up his g-file, and then he plays this move. This move opens up the rook on g7, but where's the threat? If you play h6, I can play g6. Now, if, for example, black plays the move a3 and white plays the move queen h6, that looks scary. I mean, the threaten's made, but black just goes here. Blocks everything. Pawn takes, I take your queen. That doesn't work at all. So Sam, after bishop f1, just played the move a3. This looks unbelievably dangerous. If you take b2, that doesn't look very good. If you take a takes b2, that doesn't look very good. What's happening? Well, folks, this is what's happening. It has nothing to do with h6, and it has nothing to do with queen h6. It has to do with the immediate and very swift punch in the face. Karyakin essentially got up and just took a swing. And I don't know. I'm very curious what Sam misevaluated, because the truth is, I mean, maybe he just was like, rook g7 doesn't work. It's just a quick thing. I got counterplay, you know. But I'm curious to know what was missed, because rook takes g7 is just one of these things. It's always kind of on your mind. You're like, can he do that? You don't miss it as a possibility. You misevaluate something. You miscalculate something. Because after rook takes g7, it's bad news. You still got to be accurate. You got to take. If you don't take, queen h6 is just mate after you take on h7. Maybe he missed this. Knight g4. You ignore everything. Whole house is on fire. You ignore everything. Because queen h6 and knight f6 is game over. And if you play f5, then there's en passant, you lose your queen. You also, by the way, have the really savage check. King tries to escape and you say, no escape. Knight g5 is mate in 1. That's mate. So you need to escape with the queen to give your king some runaway. And then you can very violently hunt this king down. It's going to be, I can't even show this. I'll get demonetized. So he ends up giving up the queen. And he still has a little bit of counterplay. You got to be very precise here if you're playing with white. Check here. What's the kill shot? It's not knight e5. If you play queen g8, I take your knight. That's not how you do it. What's the winning move? What's the winning move? h6. Threatening queen g7, mate. You can take and make a brand new queen and have a 9-point material advantage, and you still get mated. So that's not good. And if you play the move knight g6, then there's knight h4. And I just keep going. It's a queen on the horses. That's all I need. I don't need the bishop. I don't need this rook. This rook didn't move the whole game. Bozo didn't even play in the game. Like, what's he doing? I just gave rook odds. I just need the queen and the knights. Now, if you play rook g8, I just take the rook. Nobody can help you. The craziest thing is every piece abandoned the king. Like, this king is just completely by himself. So b takes a1 queen was played, and Shanklin very graciously allowed this very nice checkmate with queen d7 mate. Remember a long time ago, Karyakin played d4 to lock the center? Yeah, that pawn was the deciding factor. Kept the king boxed in, that one pawn. And, you know, if you just look at this position, it's hilarious. Like, it's just crazy. Like, how much material black is up. But rook takes g7, dynamite. And that's why Karyakin makes the thumbnail. If he dies, he dies. Rocky style. Now, every match has been decided. Duda Carlsen and Fedoseev awaits the winner of this match. So they're going to play tie breaks tomorrow. What a wild day. Tomorrow, also, the women have their second classical day of chess. And that concludes today's recap, folks. Hope you enjoyed. I will see you in the next one.